Please read carefully before continuing. Meh.
Stone, 2 damn phones, Babylons can't crack the code.
Welcome back to another episode. Thanks for coming in and watching this with me. Today's goal is to get the cylinder head finished off. I won't finish it completely, but what I do want to make sure that I do is get the new valve springs in, new retainers, clean my valves, get the cam gears installed, and get everything cleaned up. The cylinder head has been cleaned already, but it's still a little bit dirty in some places, so I'm going to strip it completely down and make sure that I clean it thoroughly. On the cylinder head, you can see that I've already removed the cams, cam caps, and the cam rails. I've also went ahead and took out the rocker arm assemblies. I kept them on the rail. I've taken out the rails. There's a plug that you need a 10mm Allen key for. And I've taken those out and stored those together. It's important that you keep these in order. They wear to the cam lobe. It's not as important to me because I'm going to be swapping in new cams, but I wanted to make sure I follow all the proper procedures. So I've kept them in order. This is the exhaust side intake, all those bolts are in order as well. So I have to remove the lost motion assemblies, get the new lost motion assembly in. I have to remove the valve springs, get the new valve springs in, retainers. I'm going to reuse the keepers. I want to get all of this grime cleaned up here. Cleaned up okay, but there's still some spots where I think it could be better. I think I am going to paint the cylinder block and the cylinder head a gray, just to keep it, looking a little bit better. It'll look a little bit nicer. It's going to be the same aluminum finish, but it'll just look a little bit nicer. I've already cleaned up the block. If you remember what it looks like, this looks a lot better. You can see we're rusting in some areas because I didn't spray it down immediately after. You should, if you're worried about rust, you should spray it down with WD-40 and that'll protect it from the rust. I still need to get some on here just to make sure that my engine doesn't rust out. First, I'm gonna have to remove these valve springs, and then I can remove the lost motion assemblies now. I'll just have to pull on them with a piece of pliers. You can see that it really is dirty down in here. That's another reason I want to make sure I clean this properly. I don't want to rebuild an engine and put a bunch of new parts in it and not go through all the cleaning procedures. Like I said, I opted to not do the hot tank, but I think I can get this cleaned fair enough myself. So this is the lost motion assembly here, and just let me get some pliers and I'll pull that right out. That's literally all there is to it. I have 7 more of these. You don't need to see it. It's pretty simple. All the lost motion assemblies are removed. You can test these by squeezing them and checking how much they spring. I heard a lot of engine noise when I started the engine the very first time, and this spring wears pretty badly in here. They do make a rebuild kit, so it's not required that you change these out. You can rebuild them. I just opted to go with the Skunk 2 lost motion assemblies because they were so cheap. To remove the valve springs, I ended up purchasing a tool. This tool allows you to compress the spring and pull the keepers out. It was pretty expensive for what it does. I'm actually surprised it was so much. I tried to make one, but if you can see in here, this hole is drilled at an angle, and for the life of me, I could not drill that at an angle and get it to tap properly. And then also, these holes here, I don't have a metric tap. So they send you shorter bolts. I was trying to use the cam rail bolts and they're just a little bit too long, and the piece of aluminum that I had was only 3/8, and this looks to be about, I don't know, ½ an inch. So how this works is you just screw it in and it compresses the spring with this, I guess you can call it a half moon socket where it's open, and then you're able to stick a magnet down in there and pull the keeper out. And that's one out. Now I just back this off, and the retainer should be free and the spring should be able to come up. One spring out. Since I'm going to reuse these keepers, I'm going to store them in order. It's probably not important to, but just because I'm storing everything else in order, I'll go ahead and follow suit and store the keepers in order as well. Exhaust and intake, that first one you saw came off of the left cylinder 1 spring exhaust, and I'll just remove the rest of the 15 of them, and then I'll tape this over so that they don't move or anything. while I keep them stored. I should get them back in today, so it shouldn't matter, but I just want to make sure I don't lose anything, so I'll put tape over this so they stay in place. Alright, all the valve springs are out. The intake was easy. The exhaust side gave me a little bit more trouble. Now as we look down in here, we see the only thing keeping the valves in right now is the valve retainers. I'll have to take those out. I've seen some methods where people heat them up. I'm gonna try to pull them off first before I try to heat those up. I don't want to do that, so that's what I'm gonna do. All right, valves are out, springs are out, got them in order. Exhaust intake 4321, 4321. It's all pretty simple. I'll be reusing these valves, so I want to make sure I keep those in order. These are in order also, but I'm not reusing them, so I don't really care. I'm gonna try to pull these stems out, but I'm not sure if I'm gonna be able to do it without heating them. I really don't want to heat them because I don't want to take the chance of ruining the guide, but it looks like heating it is gonna be my best choice. Alright, so as you saw, I had to torch that valve stem to get it out. I'm sorry, the valve stem seal to get that out. I'm going to have to torch all of these, it looks like. So I'm going to continue to torch them, pull them out, and I've already, on the right there, you can see that I've already removed the valve seat. So I'm going to get all that removed, taken out, and then we'll move on to cleaning this head up. Alright, I finally have the cylinder head completely disassembled, so it's ready to be cleaned. See all my old valve stem seals here. Also removed the valve seats, placed them in order as well. I have the valve springs in order, but like I said, those are being replaced, so I'm not too worried about those. I'm going to clean up the valves today also. Now this is a disclaimer. I'm not taking my cylinder head to the machine shop. I want to be able to say when this is done I did everything myself. So the cleaning process that you're about to see me go through, I do not recommend for anybody. This is a disclaimer right now. So if you get upset, you can close your eyes, turn off the video, do whatever you want, but this is how I'm cleaning my engine. So I have my engine sitting here. I'm gonna pressure wash it, but first I have some Al's all-purpose degreaser. I'm gonna spray it down really well and let that sit for a little bit. If you don't have an air compressor, I wouldn't do this. I'm not too worried about it because I can blow all the water out of any holes with my air compressor, and then I can spray some WD-40 so nothing rusts. Now that that's sprayed down, I'm going to do this a couple of times probably to make sure I get it nice and clean. You can already see down in the exhaust cavity where the degreaser is starting to eat away at all that buildup there. So this stuff works really good. I bought it off Amazon. You can get it for like 10 bucks for 64 ounces, and I'm going to be using it. Now to get my engine hot tanked, it cost around 60 bucks for the block and then 45 for the cylinder head. I went out and bought a pressure washer, which cost me about 80 bucks, and it's not a one-time process. I'll have it forever. So to me, that was the better deal. I'm not cheap, but I am fiscally conservative, and that was the best choice for me. I've got my pressure washer set up. It's pretty loud when it's running, so we're just gonna jump right to a music scene of me washing the cylinder head. Right now I have my cylinder head all hosed down, degreased. It's clean as I'm going to be able to get it here at home, but I'm pretty satisfied with the results. Like I said, I'm going to be painting this. so it'll have a nice clean finish. Cleaned a little bit of the exhaust carbon buildup that's there, but I'm not shooting for perfect, I'm shooting for clean, and for me this is satisfactory. Now that we're back inside, what I did was I went ahead and sprayed down every surface I was worried about rusting with some WD-40, and that will protect it from rust. Also, I went ahead and blew all the water out with the air compressor out of all the holes. You want to make sure you do that because you don't want to get water anywhere where it's not supposed to be. So I just went ahead and blew it all out, then sprayed everything down with WD-40. Next, I'm going to be installing these two lost motion assemblies. They just press fit in, so they're really simple to put in. I'm going to put one in, and I don't really need to show you that, but I figure since this is a video, I'll show you that as well. So I can already tell these are a lot stiffer than my OEM lost motion assembly. With my OEM lost motion assembly, I could compress the spring just by hand, and that's how you can tell that they're going bad. When I started the engine, I heard a little bit of a ticking noise. I thought either a valve was hitting or the lost motion assembly was bad. It's typical for the lost motion assembly to go bad, so I went with that. I've already looked at all my valves and none of them are bent, so I don't believe they were hitting. And to install them, it's literally just slide them in there. That's all there is to it. So I'm going to get the rest of these thrown in there, and then I'm going to install the valve seats back in and the new valve stems. Next up is the valve seats. I'm going to make sure I give these a good clean before I put them back in, and I've kept them in order, so I'll be putting them in the same place. I'm sure that doesn't matter, but I'm going to make sure that I do anyways. And to get these back in, they just slide over the valve guide and press fit down. Well, not really press fit, they just sit there. And your valve stem seal will hold that down. I've got WD-40 in here, and that will create a seal with the two metal surfaces. So when you're pulling these out, they might be stuck because of the suction due to the liquid. So that's all there is to that. Just slide it in there. And I'm not going to show you all of these. Feel like you get the gist. It's pretty simple to do. Next up, I'm going to be installing the Skunk 2 valve stem seals. I'm going to be using a 10mm socket, and I'm just going to tap them down until they bottom out. They do make a tool for this, but if you can use a 10mm socket to do it, I don't see the point in getting a tool. So what I'm going to do is place it down on the guide and press it. Then I'm going to get a 10mm socket. I need an extension. Put a 10mm socket over top of it. It's not going to hurt the seal. And you can kind of feel when it bottoms out. And make sure, I'm going to shine my flashlight in there to make sure it's all the way down. And to me, that looks good. A lot of people will tell you don't be banging on stuff, but it's not going to hurt it. You can kind of hear how the sound changed when it bottomed out. That looks good to me. So I'm going to get the rest of these installed, and then I'll come back and holler at you. Now when you look all in here, you can see I have my valve stem seals installed, I have my valve seats installed, and lost motion assemblies installed, if you can call it that. They're literally just sitting there. Now that all that's done, what would be next would be for me to install the valves, springs, retainers, and keepers. But first, I want to clean up my valves. You can see here that the valves have some carbon buildup on them, and the float side is a little built up. So what I did is I went and bought a wire wheel, and I'm just gonna wire wheel these down until they're nice and clean. I'll hit them with some brake clean, then toss them on the wire wheel. It's a brass wire wheel, so it won't eat away at the metal. Now that I've got my bench grinder set up, please forgive me for using a C-clamp to tie this down to the bench. I just don't have a workbench big enough to permanently mount this. I decided against using brake clean. First, I'm just going to give them a quick clean and see how good this wire wheel cleans them up. And if I decide I need to use some brake clean or something else, I'll probably use engine degreaser because that stuff worked really well I might let these sit overnight and then try to clean them depending on how well this wire wheel cleans these up. Just to give you an idea, this is a clean valve and then this is a dirty valve. The wire wheel is working really well. It's not damaging the valve at all. Only problem I'm having is I can't get inside of the cavity here, which I'm not too worried about. It's not going to cause any performance issues. I might just hit that with some brake clean and see if I can get that off by hand. Also, a look at the ends so you can see how well the wire wheel cleans it up. I'm going to do this to all 16 valves. I won't put you through the agony of watching me grind on valves right here. So I'll go ahead and cut to when I'm done. At this point, I have all my valves clean. I could very easily just go ahead and install the springs and valves. But first, I want to lap my valves to reseat them. Since I cleaned them, I'm going to be doing this. There is actually a lot of controversy on whether or not to lap valves on a modern engine. I don't consider a 95 V16 a modern engine, so I'm opting to lap my valves just to reseat them, just a light lap, and then I'll get my springs, retainers, and keepers reinstalled, and I'll wrap up the valve portion of this job. Now I've got the engine flipped over, so this is the intake side and this is the exhaust side. I'm gonna start with the intake, and I'm keeping in order the valves that I'm lapping to each cylinder and to each valve guide, or each valve seat. I'm going to be using a valve grinding compound and a lapping tool. So to do this, it just takes a little bit of valve grinding compound. That's probably more than enough. I'm just going to spread it around the seat here. Yeah, see, that was probably too much, but I'm leaking here, so forgive me. That's all it takes. I'm gonna wipe this clean because I don't want this compound in here forever. And what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna lap each valve, and then I'm gonna set it back in order where it was, because I'm not gonna install them right now. So that's all it took. It cleaned this seat up pretty nicely. And at this point in time, I'm realizing I would never have someone else rebuild my engine for me, purely for the fact that there are a lot of steps, and I can easily see if you have somebody do this for you, them cutting corners or missing steps. And that was one of the motivation points that I had to do this all myself, is that I would know that everything was done and everything was done correctly. Now I did just wipe that off. I'm gonna hit it with brake clean once I get all of these cleaned, just to make sure that I don't have any residual compound down in there. I'm not gonna show you the rest of them. It's a simple motion, light pressure, and it doesn't take long to get it to seat properly. So that's that's just how I'm gonna be handling this, and I'll come back once I have all the valves lapped. Alright, all the valves have been lapped, and you can actually see there's a visible difference in the color here, and that's because that's the angle that you're grinding down. The fear of lapping valves manually is that you grind this angle down too much, and then you don't get a proper seal. Had I opted to get a valve job, I would not be lapping my valves. I would have told my machinist to match the angle to the angle of the valves, and I wouldn't have to go through this. Since I opted to clean my cylinder head myself, no machinist, I cleaned my valves, so I figured I would lap them to make sure that they seat properly. And you can see that just a little bit has been ground down here. As I was doing this, I had some reservations, but throughout the process, you can actually feel once it's seated. Forgive me. You can feel once you should stop lapping, and you won't grind down too far. There's a distinct sound. There's a distinct feeling to it. You can even see the difference when you lift the valve out and look at it. All right, guys. Now it's time to get all these valve springs back in. The hardest part is going to be getting the keepers to seat inside of the retainer to make sure that we hold the valve in. What I am doing, I am using a pair of tweezers and also have some petroleum jelly. Don't get any weird ideas. This petroleum jelly is just to hold the valve keeper in place. I wanted to make sure that I could do it this way before I recorded. So as you can see, I've already got the first one down in there, and I'll show you how I'm going to get this in. First, I'm going to put the valve in, push it all the way up, place the valve spring and retainer on, push it down just far enough to where I can get the retainers push it down just far enough where I can get the retainers to seat, and then let it up and they'll catch on their way up. So I'll show you that. It's a really tedious process, so I'm only going to show you once, and then I'm going to get the rest of these in. I've already got one in, so I've got 15 left to do. First, I'm going to lift the head up and push my valve in. Using just petroleum jelly to lube my valves up. I don't think it'll hurt anything. This will melt once the engine gets up to operating temperature. So I've just got a little bit of petroleum jelly on there, and that's just to get it through the valve guide. So with the valve now in here, it's all the way up. I can get my retainer and valve spring, slide that down over top of my valve. And of course, I'm going to use my valve spring compressor tool. Going to grab my two retainers, and I've got just a little bit of petroleum jelly in there so that the valve keeper will stick to the valve. Get some tweezers down in here. That's what I mean by this is going to be a tedious process. If I don't get it on there, I got to pull it out and start all over again. So I'm only going to show you once. And it's just tight enough in here to where you need tweezers or something to get that valve on. Got one in place. Some people use oil to do this. I didn't think oil was going to be sticky enough, and I know that I just had this petroleum jelly around the house, and I figured it would be just sticky enough as long as it wasn't too hot. Now that I have both of those down in there, I'm going to just release up on the valve spring, and that should drop them in place for me. So there you can see the retainer in with the keeper on it. It's a little greasy right now, but it's not a big deal. It's holding my valves in, so I'm going to continue this process. Like I said, it's pretty tedious, but I'll continue this for the next 14 valves and valve springs. So I now have all of the exhaust side valve springs, valves, and retainers in. It's not too difficult, it's just tedious. You will need patience, and you'll need to be able to fidget with small items. I think anybody could do this. Like I said, you'll just need some patience. So now that I have the exhaust side done, I'm going to move on to the intake and wrap those up, and then we'll call this valve job complete. Now that all the valve springs, retainers, and lost motion assemblies are in, I went ahead and put in the exhaust side of the rocker arms. I'll show you what it takes to put in the intake side. It's the same both ways. I just went ahead and put this in so I had my process down. Everything looks good. I just wiped these off and then sprayed them down with some WD-40 so they don't rust. It's really simple to put this in, and I'll show you how to do that. Alright, this is the rocker arm shaft. This slides through the inside of the cylinder head, and the rocker arms rotate on this. Here, that's a pinhole that holds it in place. The way that I'm installing these rocker arms, I'm installing the press pin first. That way I can depress it and get the center VTEC pin in with the opposite side pin. I'll show you how to do that. It just slides through here. This is lubed up. I'll put the first pin in. I'm sorry, the first rocker arm. I'll put the first rocker arm in. Make sure that it's aligned over top of my valve, which it is. Then the second two, there's a pin here that locks these two together. I'll make sure that I put these in. I'll install these at the same time so I can keep them locked on that access there. And then there's also, this is the VTEC pin that pushes through and locks them all together. I'll make sure that this is installed as well. It's a really tight fit in here, but at the same time you have plenty of room to do what you need to. So all three of those are lined up, and then I'll just depress that pin to sit my third rocker arm down, and it springs freely. And I'll repeat that step for the next three cylinders. I'll show you again. The one with the pin that depresses, I'll put that one in first. And by the way, these are in the exact same order that I took them out. If you take your rocker arms out and put them back in, you want to make sure that you install them in the same order, because the heads of these wear to your cam. With me, it's not as big of a deal since I'm installing a new cam, but I'm still keeping them in order. Put the second two in, make sure that the pin is locked in. Slide them in there. Depress that pin so I can push that down. And that's it. So let me go ahead and put these last two in. Now the last part of this is to rotate the rocker arm so that you can slip a pin in here. I'm not sure if you'll be able to see it, but down in that hole, I need to make sure that that's clear right here. I need to make sure it's clear so that I can stick this pin in. This pin goes in this hole, and it's got an O-ring on it. And that's that. Now these are all locked into place. They have plugs on each end. I'll clean this plug up. I do have to check the torque specs on these. I'm not sure what it is. It's a 10mm Allen key, so I'll have to check the torque specs to make sure I torque these down right. So the torque spec for these caps here is 9 foot-pounds. I have my inch-pound torque wrench, and it only goes down to 120, which translates into 10 foot-pounds. I don't think the extra foot-pounds are going to hurt me, so I'm just going to use this to torque these down. Now at this point, technically, I can install my cams. I have my valve springs, retainers, lost motion assembly, and rocker arms in. The cylinder head is back together. Before I install my cams, there's something I have to get from my old set of cams, and to do that, I have to install a new piece of equipment. I had to install a vise. This vise isn't installed properly right now. I'll probably take these screws out and fix this up so my vise is pointed upward. But just for now, for the time being, this will work. So what I need to do is get this bolt off so that I can get this half moon keyway. This keyway is what holds your cam gear and camshaft together. So I need to take this from my old cam gears, and I'll be able to zip this right off, hold it down with the vise. I should have took this gear off before I disassembled the engine, but I was in a rush to disassemble the engine, wasn't thinking properly, and took these out before I took the gears off to get these keyways out. So this is real easy. I'm just gonna zip this off with the impact, make sure I don't drop this keyway anywhere, and get it installed on my new cams. I am using a rag to hold this cam gear in here so I don't score it up by clamping it down. I'm not too worried about it because they're old, but if I decide to sell these, I want to make sure I don't give somebody something that I've ruined. This is a 14mm bolt that's holding this on here. I know I shouldn't use an impact, but I tried to use a breaker bar, and all I did was spin in the vise. And I don't want to clamp the vise down too tight, so I'm going to use an impact so it'll basically break the seal without turning the cam gear. And another keyway. Alright, so here we have our Skunk 2 Tour Series 2 cam gear. Oh, and some more stickers. There are some stickers down in here. Please read carefully before continuing. So here's our cam gear. I believe this is going to be the intake cam gear. You can tell because on the cam gears, your distributor goes into the intake. So that's how you can tell the difference between the intake and exhaust. On the intake, there'll be this little slotted hole, and that is for your distributor to fit in. So to install our keyway, this is called a Woodruff keyway. It's a half moon shape, and that means it only goes in one way. This one, I believe the shorter end goes to the back, and it just slides in. Then you take your cam gear. There's also a slot on your cam gear that slides over. But first, I need to install this seal. And that is how that works. I'll torque these bolts down later. I'll just put them in now to hold them down. And technically I could install my cam caps, cam rails, but I think I'm just gonna sit these on the cylinder head for now because I want to make sure I lube these up really nice and well. And you can see that it is real Skunk 2. So now I have my cam gears sitting on my cylinder head. Still needs to do some work to make sure that they're installed the right way. I'll center them up, make sure that these seals are, I'll put some RTV, gray RTV on these seals to make sure that that seal's there, and tighten these bolts down. But this is as far as I'm gonna get today. I've got to teach my friend how to ride a motorcycle, so this is gonna end this video out. And in the next video, I'll clean up my cam caps and cam rails, get those installed, and the cylinder head is finished. I got my last shipment in yesterday. Last thing I was waiting on to install the cylinder head was the ARP bolts. I got these in this week, I believe, so I'll get these installed on the cylinder block. I still want to hit the cylinder block with another hone. I have it cleaned up. As you can see, it's starting to oxidize, so I'm gonna have to sand that down, and then I'm gonna paint it. I'm gonna just paint it gray to keep it preserved. But before I do that, I wanna make sure that I have the block fully assembled and the oil pan on, and then I'll set the cylinder head on and paint them both at the same time. So you can look forward to that next. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.
Rob Stone, 2 damn phones, Babylons can't crack the code. Used to